You believe you think for yourself, but history shows again and again, you don't. What you call belief is often nothing more than a reflection of the crowd around you, a story whispered into your imagination until it feels like truth. And here lies the great secret. People are not ruled by logic, but by images, symbols, and the force of suggestion. You may imagine yourself as rational, but the masses, of which you are part, move like a dreamer caught in a vivid vision, unable to separate illusion from reality. Think of the sleeper who trembles, laughs, or weeps over images in a dream. For him, they are real until daylight breaks. That is the state of society itself. It worships shadows, follows symbols, and destroys in the name of phantoms. And if you look back at the rise of religions, revolutions, or empires, you will see the same pattern. Appearance always outweighs reality. Myth towers over fact. The unreal moves people far more than the real. Crowds think in pictures. They are not persuaded by reasoned arguments, but by powerful impressions. That is why theatre, ritual, and spectacle have always carried immense influence. When thousands watch the same stage play or political performance, their feelings merge into one shared wave. Sometimes that wave spills over into action, as when enraged spectators once attacked an actor who played the villain too convincingly. They knew it was fiction, yet their hearts refused to distinguish. Conquerors, prophets, and despots all understood this truth. If you seize the imagination of the people, you seize their obedience. Napoleon himself admitted it. He ended wars not merely with armies, but by wearing the costume of belief. Catholic in France, Muslim in Egypt, ultramontane in Italy. He became what the masses imagined him to be, and for that he was worshipped as more than a man. So ask yourself, how much of what you believe is a dream inherited from the crowd? How much is an image stamped on your imagination by someone who knew how to speak not to your reason, but to your senses? You begin to see the unsettling possibility that what you thought was conviction may only be suggestion, dressed in the clothing of certainty. The imagination is the throne upon which rulers sit. Logic stumbles in its presence, for imagination speaks directly in pictures, and pictures require no translation. When a crime, a disaster, or a miracle seizes the public eye in one striking image, it burns into collective memory like fire into wood. Numbers mean nothing to the crowd. 5,000 may die quietly, and the world barely notices. But let 500 perish in one public spectacle, the collapse of a tower, the sinking of a ship, and the imagination ignites into frenzy. You already know this instinctively. It is why headlines focus on spectacle, why movements need martyrs, why leaders craft symbols. This is why you are swayed more by one photograph than by 1,000 statistics. The masses never reason in chains of thought. They leap from image to conclusion with no bridge between. Show them the will of Caesar and his lifeless body, and Antony wins their devotion in moments. Offer them 100 arguments, and they will not stir. Those who know this rule understand governance itself. Power belongs not to the one who is right, but to the one who paints the clearest image. And here lies the paradox. You may think belief belongs to you, but it often belongs to whoever held the brush that painted the picture in your mind. Convictions are not forged in silence. They are planted, watered, and nurtured by collective suggestion. That is why the masses, once possessed by an idea, quickly turn belief into a religion. A leader, a cause, even a political slogan, once clothed in mystery and fervor, becomes a god in their eyes. Worship, obedience, and even violence flow from the same fountain, an imagination captured. Religious feeling is not bound to temples and sacred texts alone. It rises whenever the crowd finds a symbol to exalt. Blind submission, fanatic devotion, intolerance of doubt, these are its features. They may be directed toward a deity, a prophet, a flag, or a political leader. The Jacobins who shed blood during the French Revolution were no less religious than the inquisitors who burned heretics, for both worshipped their ideal with the same fire. Convictions that seize the masses always wear the robe of faith, and once faith burns, reason disappears. You may think you are immune, yet pause. What banners do you revere? What names, what slogans, what invisible ideals have taken on the aura of sacredness in your mind. Once you see it, you will realize the power that governs is not truth, but the dreamlike spell of images. Empires have endured not by force, but by veneration. Rome, with its 30 legions, could never have enslaved 100 million by fear alone. The emperors ruled as gods. Their likeness filled temples, villages, and hearts, and it was devotion, not swords, that bound the empire together. The people did not obey reluctantly, they worshipped. Augustus had priests across Gaul, chosen by entire cities, celebrated as the sacred bridge between mortals and divine power. Centuries of loyalty flowed from this reverence. The pattern has never died. Where altars no longer rise, portraits and statues do. Heroes of politics, revolutions and nations are clothed in the same aura once reserved for divinities. Mass psychology demands it. To the collective mind, one is either a god or nothing. The crowd does not follow men, it follows myths made flesh. And when the myth crumbles, devotion turns to hatred as swiftly as day into night. Do not think reason has defeated this tendency. Feeling has never lost to reason. The masses may reject the gods of old, yet new fetishes appear endlessly. Political idols, celebrity cults, revolutionary leaders, each is surrounded by rituals, portraits, and unspoken worship. Even atheism, when absorbed by the masses, becomes a religion, complete with dogmas, saints, and intolerance. Dostoevsky once described the nihilist who tore down church icons, only to place portraits of atheist philosophers on the altar and light candles before them. The object changed, the religious fervor remained. This is why you see movements rise with zeal, demanding obedience, preaching intolerance, silencing dissent, and punishing unbelief. The religious feeling never disappears, it only changes form, and once it takes hold, it shapes entire civilizations, rewriting laws, reshaping societies, and justifying violence in the name of what is worshipped. You must recognize this within yourself and your world. Otherwise, you risk bowing before idols whose power comes not from truth, but from the projections of imagination. History's darkest nights cannot be explained by kings alone. The massacres, inquisitions, revolutions, and reigns of terror sprang not from royal decrees, but from the soul of the masses. When belief seizes crowds, violence follows like shadow after flame. The Inquisition tortured and burned, because it believed it must. The French Revolution's rivers of blood were not simply political, they were religious. Every new creed, whether Catholic, Protestant, or Jacobin, demanded not mere acceptance, but annihilation of all opposition. Fanaticism is the inevitable child of mass conviction. Once an idea enters the unconscious and takes root as feeling, it grows into an unshakable certainty. At that point, logic, doubt, or compassion cannot reach it. To the believer, extermination becomes virtue. The crowd no longer sees individuals, only heretics or enemies of the faith. Kings may attempt to accelerate or restrain the tide, but they cannot create it. Behind St. Bartholomew's Night, behind the terror, behind every holy war, you find not rulers, but the soul of the masses in flames. Here is the terrifying truth. The most destructive events in history were not imposed upon the masses, they were born from within them. Leaders merely rode the wave. The true power belonged to the collective imagination, ablaze with conviction, blind to reason. You see this in your own time. Ideas that seem abstract and weak to philosophers can still dominate entire nations once they take hold of the crowd. Democracy, socialism, nationalism, whether lofty or misguided, once they sink into the unconscious, they command armies, topple thrones, and demand sacrifice. Even when science has discredited them, the masses cling to them for generations, for ideas once felt as truth do not die easily. And here you stand, in a world still moved by convictions that may already be hollow, yet still alive because they burned themselves into the heart of the masses long ago. Great upheavals are never sudden. The ideas that fuel them ripen in silence, often for centuries, before bursting forth in fire. The French Revolution was not born in 1789. It was conceived nearly a century earlier in the minds of philosophers. Only when those abstract notions of liberty and equality sank into the unconscious of the people did they become irresistible, shaking the whole of Europe. Nations clashed, thrones fell, millions bled, all in service to an idea that had become sacred. But just as ideas take centuries to bloom, they take centuries to die. Long after thinkers abandon them, the masses hold them as gospel. Statesmen know the errors in the principles they must govern by, yet they cannot discard them, for the people still believe. You live in a world where the beliefs of yesterday dictate the politics of today, not because they are true, but because they are still alive in the heart of the masses. This delay reveals the secret of mass thinking. Ideas are not absorbed as logic, but as feeling, and feeling binds deeper than proof. A man may hear arguments that shatter his beliefs, nod in agreement, and yet return days later to the same convictions, unchanged. Why? Because the old belief has become a feeling, and feelings dwell deeper than reason. The same is true for crowds, only magnified. So the masses cling to yesterday's truths, even as philosophers have moved on. They obey the ghosts of dead ideas, as if reason itself had never spoken. And when new beliefs finally take hold, they sweep across nations with the force of destiny, unstoppable and absolute. Do not mistake this for ignorance. It is the nature of the collective soul. And until you understand it, you will always mistake the shadows of history for the actions of kings, rather than the dreaming force of the people themselves. You may still hope that reason can free the masses, but reason is not their instrument. The collective mind does not weave logical chains, it leaps with crude associations. To the crowd, ice melts in the mouth, glass is also transparent, therefore glass must melt in the mouth. One employer is unjust, therefore all employers are oppressors. Such leaps of thought are the law of mass reasoning. And these leaps are precisely what leaders exploit. Arguments refined for philosophers fail in the public square. The orator who moves crowds does not appeal to logic, he paints images. A few sharp phrases, vivid and direct, carry more weight than 20 volumes of reason. The crowd does not examine, it absorbs. It does not judge truth from error. It accepts what is suggested, like a spell placed upon the mind. You may think yourself different, but the same forces act upon you. How many of your judgments are inherited, suggested, repeated, rather than examined? How often have you believed something not because it was reasoned, but because it was said with conviction, surrounded by symbols that stirred your imagination? This is the root of mass delusion, an incapacity for critical spirit, a surrender to images and associations, a blindness to truth in favor of suggestion. And this blindness explains why people worship without question, obey without hesitation, and destroy without remorse. They do not reason themselves into belief, they feel their way into it, and once felt, it is unshakable. Here lies your awakening. The power of delusion is not foreign, not distant, not only in the crowd. It is in you. Until you see it, you will not master it. You have walked through the anatomy of mass delusion, the spell of images, the rise of worship, the violence of belief, the slow march of ideas, and the chains of false reasoning. Now comes the choice. You can remain a dreamer within the collective trance, or awaken to see the spell for what it is. Awakening does not mean rejecting society, but seeing clearly how belief is planted, how obedience is cultivated, and how destruction is justified. With awareness, you are no longer swept blindly by the tide. You begin to choose where your own energy flows. So look again at the banners you follow, the idols you revere, and the truths you defend. Ask if they are truly yours, or if they were placed in you long ago. To see through delusion is to reclaim sovereignty over your own mind. The masses may always worship, obey and destroy without question, but you are not bound to remain among them. The moment you recognize the mechanism, you break its hold, and in that recognition lies your freedom.